Welcome back for another episode of Futures in Fundraising. I'm your host, David King, president of Alexander Haas. Today, our guests are Margaret Venable, who is the president of Dalton State College, and her right-hand man, David Elrod, who is the director of institutional advancement. Thank you both for joining us today. I wanted to ask you about something. I know I read in the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, and I have to caveat this, that I didn't actually have the newspaper in my hand. It was the online version, because who has the newspaper in their hand anymore?
True.
But you guys were designated this year as a Hispanic Serving Institution, which is a very specific designation from in higher education, where you have 25% Hispanic enrollment. I want to ask you some about that. I'm sure that some of that has to do with demographics. I mean, Dalton has always had a high Hispanic population because of the carpet industry, but that hasn't always, that population hasn't always been matriculating to higher education. So there must be some other things you guys are doing other than just, we happen to be lucky and we're here and the population is here, to attract that level of Hispanic engagement in higher education. How has that happened for you guys?
Well, I will say a lot of it was luck. A lot of it was demographics, and the fact that these families understand the value of higher education for their children, their sons and daughters. In fact, I brag all the time on our students. For many college students, college is just what you do after high school. Right. For our students, they're there because they know that college is a gateway to a future, a bright future for themselves and their families. So the parents seem to understand that. They want education for their sons and daughters. So in that sense, we are lucky. But yes, of course, we've done some intentional things to attract and retain and graduate these students. We have a director of Hispanic and Latino outreach who works not just with the entering students and the current students, but with the entire families to make sure they understand the processes, how it works. We've translated materials for parents into Spanish in case, language is a barrier, to make sure the entire family is comfortable. And of course, we're getting siblings. Once one person comes to Dalton State, then they bring their siblings and their cousins and so forth with them.
And I also noticed that you use students as recruiters.
Absolutely.
In some sense.
Yes. In fact, I'm very proud of the fact that because our students come organically from our community, they've grown up with everybody. They've all grown up together, is what I'm trying to say. And so when they come to Dalton State, they meld seamlessly into our population. We don't have, when you go to the cafeteria, you don't see Hispanic students sitting at one table and white students sitting at another table and black students sitting at a third table. You just see students. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, this designation, I think there must be more to it than just, you get named a Hispanic Serving Institution. Does that bring other opportunities to the college?
Yes. In fact, that's one of the reasons that we were so intentional about seeking this, not letting it just happen organically. It gives us an opportunity to apply for grants that are designated for Hispanic Serving Institutions, and it also gives us a leg up on other grants where we have this designation that gives us a higher priority, a higher score in the review process that makes it more likely for us to get grant funds. And the key thing is that these grant funds will benefit all of our students.
That was one of the things I wanted to ask you about. I have a high school senior now, so we are right in the slog of college application process, and I guess we've been through the hurry up stage and we're now in the wait stage. Yes. But because I'm involved in that in my personal life, and even though the firm does a lot of work in higher education, I think I am more acutely aware right now of the cost of higher education than I have ever been, even after 30 years of working in the college and university setting. What is it? I mean, how do you guys address that? Surely a lot of the students coming have, paying for college is going to be a struggle for them. Heck, it's going to be a struggle for me.
Right.
How are you addressing sort of that part of the equation?
Well, I want to let David address that because he's our fundraiser, and he speaks very eloquently to that point.
Cost at Dalton State is a big issue for our students because of where we're located geographically in southern Appalachia.
Yep.
The northwestern corner of Georgia has never been extraordinarily wealthy, and we have about over half of our students require need-based financial aid to come to a campus that is rated one of the most affordable campuses
Wow.
in the United States every year. You can get an education here with us for just over $4,000 a year, and so many of our students don't have that.
Yeah.
And so that's the role that private philanthropy can play and where it can have its greatest impact on these young lives, because $100, $200, $500 might keep a student out of college that we see every day.
Right.
And the impact of that, where we can provide scholarship support, where we can just provide a little what we call gap funding just to get them through to the next semester, is a very big deal for us, and it's important to our donors. They like to do this. We like to facilitate this, and we're glad to be where we are and able to make that change happen.
Yeah, because it's not just the tuition when you talk about it. I mean, again, I've become acutely aware of all these things, but textbooks are grotesquely expensive. And so you have
And
that.
housing.
Yeah, well, and housing is, I think at most of the schools that my son is looking at, housing is going to cost more than tuition.
Right.
And in some cases, a lot for state schools where he'll be a Hope Scholar, a lot more than tuition. And
Yes.
and so there's not as, there isn't as much aid available to cover those other necessity costs.
Well, and at a school like Dalton State, where a lot of our students are working and going to college, they've got family obligations maybe. If they're not the head of the household, they're at least assisting financially with the family's finances. And so sometimes they have to make a choice. Do I go to work or do I go to college? And that's where scholarships can come in and make that difference for those students, is they don't have to make that choice. They can commit to go to college and know they're going to be okay.
And I would imagine too that that there's a lot of flexibility that you provide them in terms of when classes are offered to make that happen.
Yes, we try to offer multiple sections, multiple times of day, a lot of online options,
Okay.
and particularly our younger generation, they often like the online courses because it does offer flexibility, absolutely. But I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with a student at graduation and heard their story about how they've worked 2 and 3 jobs while they were going to college, and I just don't know. It's amazing the determination they have to get through.
I just worked one while I was going to college, and I remember when I graduated and all I had to do was work,
Right,
thinking it was like being on vacation.
right.
When at 5 o'clock, you mean I can just go home? I don't have 8 hours of studying to do. I can just go home. That's amazing. I want to circle back. We started talking about donors and donor engagement and how donors are sort of making it happen for these students. You recently got the largest gift in the history of the college for the business school, and I've been involved in enough of those kind of experiences and those kind of gifts to know that to make that happen, to get a donor to stretch to that kind of level, takes a while. I mean, you have to bring them there. Most, whether we like it or not, our philanthropic culture sometimes has a glass ceiling of what's the largest gift you've ever received, and nobody wants to go above it. Tell me about that journey with that donor and getting them from wherever they started to being the largest donor in the history of the college.
That journey is a 50-year story.
We don't have 50 years, but we can maybe compress it a little.
Truly, the donor, Lamar Wright, and his wife Ann Wright. Lamar was in the college's first graduating class in 1969.
Wow.
And he went on to other things when he left then Dalton Junior College. But he has been very clear in telling his story, and it gives the college the credit. The college changed my life, he said. very upfront about it. He's very proud of that fact. And he really views this as his giving back. Now, this is the institution that gave him his springboard to his success in business and in other things. And he's very cognizant that but for that, he would not have these opportunities to do what he's doing. So it really started in '69 when he graduated. We began talking with the family in about 2006, 2007. About
probably not their best timing for that gift, but
right.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, it was very clear they wanted to make a gift, but they weren't in a position to make the gift that they would want to make.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had a very frank back and forth then about, we'll contribute, but we can contribute later in a way that has an impact we all want us to have. And so we just stayed in touch, of course, over those years. And in 2014, those discussions really began to move forward in a significant way, where I think the Wrights and we both knew where we were headed by that point. And in the summer of 2015, they signed the pledge, and it was for $5 million. They've allowed us to publicize the number.
Great.
$5 million to expand and renovate the building that houses our School of Business. And so we leveraged his gift with state funds for a $10 million overall project. We had a big groundbreaking ceremony last fall. Lamar is like a kid. He loves all of this, and he is at the front of the parade on getting people interested and excited and hearing about the good things going on at Dalton State.
Well, but I also want to brag on David, because I feel like part of that was that the Wright family felt comfortable and confident with the college, and I give David credit for developing and continuing that relationship all over so many years, to make sure that the Wright family continued to feel engaged and comfortable with the direction we were moving the institution, with the what we would do with such a gift from a donor, because I was a relative newcomer on the scene when this gift happened, as a relatively new president. And so I feel certain he didn't suddenly decide, because there's a new president, let me, give this money now. No, it really is because of the relationship that David had developed over the years.
It's interesting because we had a conversation on a previous episode of Futures in Fundraising about sort of the number one thing that you have to have in the philanthropic dance is trust.
Right.
And that trust, this conversation was, trust takes a long time to build and just a second to completely erode. So that, I think part of that gift process was capacity and having the capacity to do it. But another part was, over a long period of time, trust and following through.
Right.
And I think probably, Margaret, that obviously that trust had to translate onto you. I know David was the shepherd
right.
To get there, but if they didn't trust the president to implement, that wouldn't have happened either. So we're going to take a short break. We will be right back with more on Futures in Fundraising.
Just as of last night, I finished The Murder of the Century by Paul Collins. So I love to have two books going at once, typically. So it's typically a fiction and a nonfiction. But this recently, I just finished Murder of the Century, which is a true crime, turn of the 19th to 20th centuries. Just big, huge newspaper murder, if you would, and also Start With Why by Simon Sinek, which is really focused on leadership and effective leadership styles, and loved both of them.
Welcome back. Our guests today on Futures in Fundraising are Margaret Venable and David Elrod from Dalton State College. Thank you guys again for being with us today.
Thank you.
We were talking about the transformational gift from the Wrights that the college received. And David, you mentioned that when that gift came along, or maybe Margaret, you mentioned it, that you were fairly new to the
Yes.
college when that happened. You guys have had a lot of time now relative to that few months to work together in the fundraising process. And in fact, when Nancy Peterson suggested that we have you on the show, one of the things she said is you need to have them both because they do this fundraising thing as a team. It
Right.
really is. So I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind, to share with us sort of that president and chief development officer relationship, how it works for you guys, how you use each other's different skill sets and talents. Sort of how does this, I'm getting all this feedback that this is, sort of a unique chemistry that you guys have pulled together for this. So tell me about that and tell me how it works and how you've made this happen.
Well, I'll tell you my perspective, and then I'll let David correct me. I'm kidding, but I do think we work well as a team. I think we've gotten comfortable enough with each other that when we go in with a donor, we can just kind of play it by ear. We kind of sense, each other, and one of us jumps in when the other one's floundering.
Finishing each other's sentences, kind of thing.
Yes, in general, I would say that I tend to be the one that talks about the vision, the future, what we aspire to be as an institution. David knows better than I do the history, but David is also the one that comes in with the technical questions and that conversation about, how long can we stretch this and so forth and so forth, the paperwork. But there have been times that we've had to improvise, and I'll give an example. The other day, we went in to speak with the donor, and we were just doing our usual thing. He has the handouts talking about our potential projects, and I hand it to the donor, and I go over that generally and point out some of the key opportunities. Well, I got it out and realized I didn't have my glasses with me.
I feel you right
Yes.
now.
So by memory, I mentioned a few of the key highlights, and then I said, and then David's going to talk to you about the details. And he's looking at me like, why? And he didn't know why, but afterwards I explained, I didn't have my glasses. So we have to be flexible that way, and David's a good partner. I appreciate him.
We talked about trust a minute ago.
Yeah.
And the president can't be everywhere and see everybody. That's my job. And so while we're building that trust, though, it's not trust just in me, it's trust in the college and the institution. And there is no better embodiment of an institution than its president. And because they know she is the chief architect, chief visionary, and they also know when you walk in with the president, you've brought all of those assets to bear. Our biggest asset is her time. Our biggest asset is her ability to show a donor the way to the future and where we want to go. And so when we go in and do that, I can do the technical pieces on the mechanics of the gift and work out the giving vehicles and that kind of thing. But there is no substitute for having your president with you. The flip side of that is the donor knows it's going to be an interesting call.
The donor knows what's coming, right?
Because we don't take her out for free.
He brought out the big guns. Here we go.
But we do. We've gotten in a place where that we can riff off of each other now, and I think the donor can sense that too. And it doesn't need to be a tense or an uncomfortable conversation, and that makes the donor feel better, and then they feel better just about the college in general.
Great. Yep. How long did it take for you guys to get there? I mean, how many calls did you go on where maybe it was a little awkward?
Well, the first two or three in particular, I remember us talking ahead of time about, who was going to say what and what order, and it did feel very awkward.
Scripted, maybe?
Yes,
Too
right.
scripted?
Too scripted, yes. But I really was surprised, at least for me, and again, David can correct me, but for me, how quickly it felt natural. Because again, I knew I could rely on his knowledge of the history of the college and so many things, so that if something came up in conversation with a donor that I didn't really know much about, I could just turn to David and he would respond. So I felt pretty quickly that we developed that rapport, that sense of, I'm looking at you, David, because I'm counting on
Answer
you
this.
to discuss this, because I don't know. Anyway, I think it happened pretty quickly.
And part of that is we enjoy doing this.
Mm.
This is not a chore.
Right.
This is a thrill.
You don't mean this that we're doing now.
No.
You mean, you mean supporting the college.
out,
Yeah.
There's
Because
this,
most people think this is a chore.
no, this is a thrill and a privilege and an honor to get to represent the college in this way. Because what we're doing is we're matching a donor's wish to be able to move the college forward, and we're showing them these are the ways we can work with you to achieve that.
Yep.
In many ways, we're a facilitator, because it's about fulfilling that donor's ambition. And I stand up at Scholarship Day every year when we announce all of our scholarship awards and say there's nothing more fun than getting to spend someone else's money. And while there's a little
My
bit
daughter would concur.
a kernel of truth in that, we're helping the donor do what they can't do on their own. And that's a thrill to get to do this.
And I would say I'm not a salesperson. I tell people I can only sell something if I truly believe in it, and that is what works for me. David and I both have the same passion, I think, for the institution, for our mission, for the students that we're serving, and that's why together I think we create a formidable pair because we believe passionately in what we're offering our donors to invest in.
So one of the things we talk with clients about a lot, and you guys may have been talked about with Nancy, some of this stuff is that what you're really in is the development and the relationship business, and that fundraising is just a moment in time in that overall process. It's not all about asking for money. What it's really about is finding what the donor's interested in and sharing with them things that you're doing or planning to do that dovetail with what they're trying to accomplish as well. And that if you do a good job at that you almost don't have to ask for money.
Right.
That the donors will say, what can I do to make that happen?
That goes back, David, I guess, to the old adage in fundraising that a good fundraiser is a good listener. If you're talking, you're not doing the job. President and I were with a prospect recently, and she and I had gone in with an idea that this is where we think he wants to be. This is what we think he might have an interest in. He disabused us of that pretty quickly, and had we not been listening to him, we would have gone into a place where he would have just shut us down. What happened is he opened another door, and he began talking about what was important to him. He began touching his heart, and he said, this really touches me as a human being. We know a way forward with him, and now he has invited us to present him with a 7-figure proposal. Yeah. So if we're doing our jobs right, we're listening more than we're talking.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the keys when people ask me about, skill sets for development officers, and I'd say communication. But I say, but I don't mean they're good giving speeches. But I mean, communication by definition is a two-way thing. Yeah. So you can be great at, going in and making a pitch, but if you aren't a good active listener, and if you don't take the time to actively listen, then you can actually undo that trust like that, just, by not being, I remember an institution I worked with that I won't name, for reasons that will become obvious as I tell this little story, but I went to interview a donor for a campaign strategy study, and it actually was a donor in Dalton, who I also won't name. And so we're sitting down and we're having this conversation about what they want to do, and we get to the point where it's sort of like, what do you think you might do to help the campaign? And he said, I'm going to sit this one out. And it was an alum who had been very generous and was very wealthy. And he said, that first time I ever met that president, he sat across from me and asked me for $5 million. I hadn't known him for more than 10 minutes. Said we hadn't had time to have a cup of coffee. He said, I think I'm going to sit this one out. So that, ability to go in and having your idea what your agenda might be, but to read the room and adjust is incredibly important.
We never want this to be transactional. We want this to be relational. And I think that's one of the keys that helped us with the Lamar and Ann Wright gift is we listened to them years earlier when they told us timing's not right for us. We'll do a gift, but it's not the gift you want. Let's talk a little bit more.
Yeah.
And had we not listened to that, we would have gotten the gift, but we may not also have the relationship we have with them. And I would dare say Lamar and I, we're personal friends now, partly as a result of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
We're very
I'm
close.
also going to remind us that we worked with them on exactly what would the gift do. What do you want to see as a result of this gift? So we really, and I credit David for those conversations, but listened carefully to what he said and then try to translate that in. So what I'm hearing you saying is that you want this. So is this the kind of thing that you would want? And so we really worked with the Wrights on developing exactly what it was that was going to make them glad that they had given us that $5 million gift.
Yeah. And was the possibility of leveraging the state money, was that also a good carrot sort of to have in your pocket for that conversation?
Lamar's
Absolutely.
a businessman. He gets the power of making your money work. And very early when we began in 2014 and in 2015 talking about what he wanted to do, he asked me, he said, "What can you do with this?" And I just told him, I said, "Well, I can't commit today, but I'm going to explore a state match." And he lit up,
Yeah.
So it was one of the keys.
Good.
Well, and I say this a lot of times, but our donors are truly looking for investments.
Mm-hmm.
And so they do want to know that if I invest this money, is this really going to make a significant difference to the institution? And how can it be leveraged to increase the return on investment in additional ways? Will it inspire other donors?
Right.
Will it get matching funds from the state and so forth?
Yeah, I think that I think that is true when you begin to work with sophisticated donors, that they are looking at more than just what will this buy.
Right.
What can it do and how can it inspire other people to do, whether the other people are students or other donors or state funders, or how can we really leverage this, because they recognize that typically just throwing money at problems doesn't solve them.
Right.
And that's where we can do so much in these partnerships with people, is some of these people, they can buy anything they want.
Right.
But working with us, Lamar, his mantra is 2 words: changing lives.
Right.
And that's what he wants to do. And that's what gifts like his can do.
Mhm.
And that's what we can help him accomplish. And that's good for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And I'm also going to add, in addition to the cash, which we always appreciate, so many of our donors, I really emphasize with them, we value your relationship with the institution. And the Wrights are a perfect example. They are very engaged with the college. They come to etiquette luncheons that we have with our business students who are learning those business skills that they need before they graduate. And they love those kinds of interactions. Well, that's important. It's benefiting us just as much if they had given us a cash gift. So there are other ways that our donors contribute to the college.
we talk about etiquette. One of my pet peeves with my own children and with a lot of college students who I come into contact with through our work on campuses is using the word "like," 1,000 times
Right.
in a conversation. And I joked with my son the other day that if he said "like" again, I was going to go get the dog's training collar and the little remote control thing. And every time he said it, I was going to zap him. I didn't do this, so don't call DFAX. I just threatened it. But I figured that by the end of the day, I would probably have broken him of that. But we, but that's it too, is when you talk to people about, they're graduating college and they're moving into a business world, there is an etiquette.
Right.
And there is a sort of standard of speech and behavior that may not be familiar with them if they haven't had a father with a shock collar. That is part of it beyond just the A's, B's, and C's in the classroom.
Right. Absolutely.
So Margaret, I want to ask you as we wrap up here, we've talked about vision, and David's talked about you as the visionary, and I think that is a big part of the role of a college president in the world we live in today. Talk to us about the vision for Dalton State and where you see the college 5 years, 10 years, however far down the road your crystal ball goes.
Well, you have just pulled my string. I always warn people against asking presidents to talk about their institutions. Truly, it's one of my proudest things to talk about the college, because I do see it as an achievable goal for Dalton State to become a first choice destination college. By that I mean first choice, not a last resort, not a, well, if all else fails, I guess I go to Dalton State. I want students to be proud to choose Dalton State. I want parents to be proud to say my son attends Dalton State or graduated from Dalton State, or my daughter is planning to go to Dalton State. That's the first choice piece. The destination piece is, we used to be a 2-year college, and there's still a mindset that, well, Dalton State is a great place to get a good start, and then you can transfer. And with 24 4-year degrees now, there are fewer reasons for our students to transfer. And so we're trying to get that word out and make sure that parents and students know, you can actually graduate from Dalton State with no debt, affordable, high-quality college education. That's the first choice destination college. And we're almost there, frankly. I think when I first rolled that out, people kind of laughed and chuckled. And I told my folks this fall, I said, I wasn't kidding. And we're actually well on our way toward achieving that vision of becoming a first choice destination college.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both again for joining us today on Futures in Fundraising. That was a great way to close, talking about the future of the college. I want to thank all of you who joined us today for this episode of Futures in Fundraising, and encourage you to join us again for the next episode.